Hello and welcome back to the Dial Global Virtual Summit. I'm really excited about this next panel. This third panel of the day is focused on ethnicity reporting, setting effective targets and practices. So ethnicity reporting and data collection is vital when it comes to understanding and uncovering the disparities and inequities that we see in the workforce based upon ethnic backgrounds. By collecting and analysing this data, organisations can better identify any gaps when it comes to representation, pay, promotions, opportunities amongst our different and wonderful ethnic groups. Our panel is going to be diving into diverse approaches to achieving racial equity through ethnicity reporting in a bid to foster better inclusion. This session is going to be exploring challenges in transparent data collection and its pivotal role in analysing and mitigating the ethnicity pay gap. Our diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, and HR experts are going to be delving into topics that include how we can create impactful goals focused on race and ethnicity, how ethnicity data can drive meaningful changes within an organization's diversity initiatives more broadly, challenges of collecting and analyzing this data, how we can address them, leading practice case studies showcasing successful ethnicity data collection and reporting, and tools and methodologies transferable that can facilitate the ethical and sensitive collection of this data. I am thrilled to welcome to our virtual stage today three brilliant individuals. Their names are Bob Atwell, Culture and Belonging Director at Skyscanner, Fiona Barron, Senior ER and IR Strategy Head at Royal Mail, and Adonica Black, Global Director of DE&I at LexisNexis. Before we delve into the conversation, I'd love to do a little round robin in that same order, just to explain a little bit about your role and what makes you so passionate about diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture. Bob.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Atwell, as Leila said. I look after culture and belonging at Skyscanner, which includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, of course. And yeah, really the fact that, you know, an inclusive workplace that allows all identities to thrive is really the future, and it has been the future for many years. And so, you know, those in the diversity space, the equity space, inclusion space have been doing this for a long time. I think we've just got a loud voice now, and we really got to take that moment to kind of make sure that voice doesn't get drowned out. So that's probably why I'm so passionate about it. So thanks, Leila.
Couldn't agree more, Bob. This is literally the future. Fiona, coming to yourself. Oh, Fiona.
Apologies. I didn't unmute there. That was very stupid of me. Yeah, my name is Fiona Barron, and as you mentioned, I work in the industrial relations team in Royal Mail, but I'm also part of our employee resource group, the Embrace Network, which is for ethnically diverse colleagues, and I've been working in that environment in the Embrace Network for about 5 years now. And I suppose for me, it's really in some sense it's quite a personal thing as well. Sort of being of mixed heritage, having four adult children who have a black father, who have even more mixed heritage than me. And for me, it's really important that they would feel welcomed and feel that they belong and they're included in any workplace that they're in. And I'd like that reflected back in where I work as well, in Royal Mail. I would like people in Royal Mail, whoever they are, to feel that they're part of Royal Mail, that they belong, that they're included, and their contribution is valued. And I think that's why I enjoy my Embrace work quite so much.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and you are doing a brilliant job with Embrace, and wonderful to hear about personal story there as well. Last but never least, coming to yourself, the brilliant Adonica.
Thanks, Leila. Very happy to join you all today. I am Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for LexisNexis Legal and Professional. And as Leila knows, I like to say all three of those words because they're all very important and they all mean something distinctively. And for me, I'm really committed to this work because of the access and the opportunity that it presents. I believe through diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can really unlock performance and innovation. And creating that space and being able to enable that is really rewarding and engaging for me personally. And I think also supports just a wonderful growing business.
Thank you so much, Adonica. And I love that you brought that up about saying the full words. We spoke right at the beginning of the panel. Obviously, we're seeing, huge amounts of sometimes polarizing press, frankly. And we mentioned on our podcast only the other day, actually, about Elon Musk, had he have said the full words, would he have really said this? Words are meaningful, as we know. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture, all very, very, very important indeed. Now, Fiona, I would love to come to yourself first, if I may, so we could really explore the subject matter within this panel and talk about why ethnicity reporting in particular is so important in today's workplace and the broader societal landscape. We often talk about putting the S in ESG. In what ways does ethnicity data drive meaningful changes within an organization's diversity initiatives?
Okay. So the first aspect there that you were talking about is why is it particularly important in today's society? And I've kind of been giving that a little bit of thought. And I suppose I see it from three elements, three levels. And I think there's a bit about fairness for employers, if we're talking about the workplace, about reputation, and also about the commercial aspects of ethnicity reporting. So I think, in the UK here, we have our census, and the ethnicity profile of our workforce has changed so considerably. 2011, our census was it showed that 1 in 8 of the workforce was ethnically diverse. And by the time we come to 2021, that's 1 in 5. And it's projected by 2051 to be 1 in 3. And so there's significant changes in the landscape there in terms of the ethnicity that we in our country, in the UK, and I'm sure in other countries it will be quite similar. And if you look at particular pockets, if you looked at, for example, East London, in Newham Council, 70% of East London, of that part of East London, is ethnically diverse. So for those employers who pride themselves on being fair and transparent and non-discriminatory, that really poses a challenge for them, because they have to actually prove themselves worthy of having those credentials. And one of the ways that they can do that is through ethnicity reporting. And I think that also comes down to reputation. If part of our reputation, if those employers are saying that they're fair and transparent and non-discriminatory, they need to have a workforce that reflects that reflects the customer and reflects the community, and they need to be able to demonstrate that, and that is about their reputation if that's what they're saying. And clearly in ethnicity reporting there will be legal implications as well, which I think you've touched on, even in terms of that equal pay. There are if we're reporting on ethnicity, that as an employer protects us from legal challenge as well, and legal challenge can be costly financially and costly reputationally. And those are things that, that through ethnicity reporting, we can protect ourselves and, reduce the vulnerability to those sorts of challenges. And then, you've got that commercial aspect, and you've got the McGregor-Smith review recently suggested that if we include Black, Asian, mixed race groups in our UK workforce, that can actually make a boost of around £24 billion to the UK economy. So there's that commercial aspect as well, that we need to not only be doing it, but through reporting, showing that we're doing it. And then you kind of moved on there a little bit there, didn't you, in terms of how ways in which access to ethnicity data can drive changes. So, there may be a school of thought that says that doesn't happen. And I did actually have a little debate with someone yesterday about that, and they said, I don't think it happens. So here's me to try and prove otherwise. But I have access to an incredible amount of data, ethnicity type data, whether it's through the demographics of the workforce, recruitment, retention, attrition levels, annual performance reviews are broken down by ethnicity. Our employee survey is broken down by ethnicity. And I think when you have all that data, and the important thing about having that data is questioning it, because it should generate questions, shouldn't it? You need to ask and you need to question the data. What is it telling you? What is it not telling you? Have you actually got the right data? Is it accurate? And those sorts of things. Is it what's missing? Sometimes it can be like, we've got all this data on that, what's actually missing? So in that ethnicity reporting, I think the first thing is about being curious, because it's through being curious, then you get the insights into what it's telling you. And it's those insights that will drive what you do with the data, whether it's, setting the strategy and the action plan and the targets. And if you're setting targets, are the targets, are you benchmarking? So, for example, as I mentioned before, we've got the census, and in Royal Mail we have our ethnicity targets, and our ethnicity targets, they don't actually. Well, 2021, as I mentioned, is like 19.3% of our working population is ethnically diverse. That's not reflected in Royal Mail's workforce. So we need to set sometimes challenging targets, but also achievable. They need to be statistically achievable. Like you meant, you should be recruiting people. Or whatever, but also that reporting, that access to that data will allow you to look at what needs to change, and it'll help you plan the resources and the finances, the people, the time, whatever it is that you need to input to make that change. As mentioned, it will help you with the benchmarking, but it will also help you measure progress. You need to have a baseline. So the ethnicity reporting gives you that baseline, so you can measure progress. You can measure the progress of individual initiatives and determine whether or not they're being successful. If they're not making the impact, and I'll give you an example from Royal Mail in terms of if we've got quite a challenging target of having 15% of our workforce from ethnically diverse by 2025, March 2025. In March last year we were at 13%. In January this year we're at 13%. So we haven't made the inroads. So are our initiatives working? If they're not working, that's a time to be innovative. Sometimes you've got to be creative. You've got to decide that's not working. What you're going to change, and it's only through measuring progress that you can do that. And then I suppose finally maybe about publishing data. If we've got ethnicity reporting, we're publishing our targets. For example, we publish them in our ESG report and our accounts. Then we can hold ourselves accountable. And accountability drives change as well. We need to be accountable for the change happening. If we say it's going to happen, we need to make it happen. So and then I think I mentioned about looking forward as well. If you look at, say, the ethnicity pay gap in the UK, we don't that isn't mandatory yet. But all the time you need to be looking forward. What's on the horizon? And through that reporting, you'll be preparing yourself for something that is going to come on the horizon soon, very soon.
Thank you so much, Fiona. You've brought up some incredibly pertinent points there. It is absolutely about this horizon scanning. We talked a lot in our previous panels about what the impact of inaction is. Obviously we're hearing a lot from businesses. What's the return on investment? I may sound very biased here, of course, and I am to a degree. I think diversity leaders, culturally leaders within organizations are absolutely the most resilient and driven individuals that I know. But ultimately, we are seeing this evolution from the top to the bottom within organizations, within countries, that populations are becoming far more ethnically diverse. And so how we can continue to reflect this not only in the community, but also within a far growing and intelligent stakeholder pool for all the different individuals which our businesses serve. Hearing the figures and the stats, 24 billion to the UK economy alone, not even including other countries, is astronomical, thus proving this point that diversity is a commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity. Barbara Donecker, I'd love to come to you if there's any reflections on some of the brilliant points that Fiona made there.
I just had a thought and a reflection, really. I think Fiona's outlined, brilliantly why, we should do it. I would say that I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I think the challenge is a bit more complicated for us, though, because I don't think you're going to find any leader saying this isn't important, it doesn't have commercial value, it's the right thing to do, etc., etc. But then when you start to peel the layers back, legally there's some challenges, data protection wise there's some challenges, there's some sort of complexity around is it mandatory, is it not mandatory, people's sort of trust aspects, and I know Layla will talk about that a bit later, but so I think the conversations need to shift a little bit, because my worry is we're talking, I think all of us will be agreed this is the right thing to do. And by the way, at Skyscanner, I am desperate to do it. And I'm desperate to do it for all identities, particularly race and ethnicity. But I think I think Fiona mentioned it again, without the data, you don't have a baseline. And without a baseline, you then can't take action. But actually what I'm finding, and not that it ain't possible to overcome it, but what I'm finding is that we have to deal with all of those other hidden issues, really, and that's where we need to get momentum, that's where we need to galvanize. And the data's there, the data's already there. If you just look at it, and it's just one pipeline of talent, but if you look at early career populations and you look at graduates, you look at those graduates that have come from a higher socioeconomic background versus those from a lower socioeconomic background, there's enough research out there, particularly in the UK and more broadly around the world, that says disproportionately they will earn less than their white counterparts. And so we know that's the case. And obviously then we've got to jump through all of the data stuff and legal compliance, et cetera, to kind of then start to do something about it. So I think that's my only reflection, is I think I almost would urge people that, help us break down those barriers really that are up to kind of enable us to produce the data so we can actually have a baseline to do something about it.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there. And I think Bob and Fiona really highlighted exactly what you would like to share with the group around key challenges that we face with regard to ethnicity reporting, and then really how do you address those challenges? Because to both of their points, we do have data, and then there is also this challenge around what do you do with the data, right? So if you think about it I look at it from a few different headline outline topics. First of all, when you think about ethnicity reporting, you have to define ethnicity, right? And ethnicity, really, that's a mechanical issue, because ethnicity is on a spectrum in and of itself. Identities are on a spectrum. And then when you think about pluralistic identities, multiracial identities, how do you capture that ethnicity reporting to be able to have effective data? Start there, I think first about really being collaborative and how you're collecting this information. So to Bob's point, before you can even start to collect data, you kind of have to build trust with the communities you're asking to report and self-identify around. And that starts with asking them, the stakeholders in your community, to help you think about really what even are the categories that resonate when you're reporting ethnicity data. And then from there, have really open-ended conversations, well-educated conversations. Whoever is your data collector needs to have nuanced understanding of what identity means and how that contributes to ethnicity, and have that respect for that community to be able to effectively capture that data first. And then when you get past that point, that collection and that methodology is really key. And I think that's something a lot of organizations are challenged with currently when thinking about how do you get people to self-report their identities. And there's this doctrine of work happening in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space around self-identification. But in order to allow for self-identification, you have to address privacy concerns and you have to address trust. How and why will the data be used? Because it wasn't that long ago that this kind of data was collected for nefarious reasons. So we really, as an organization and as a community, have to acknowledge that, I think, explicitly and more than one time. We saw that, I think, across the globe with the pandemic and certain communities being very hesitant to trust medical directives because of the experiences that they had in the past. So I think approaching this with a degree of humility and transparency around previous transgressions and how they're being actively corrected will help to support accurate data and reporting. And then when you think about also, have you earned the right of that trust? I know there's a lot of wanting to assume good intent, but you have to earn the right for that good intent to be assumed. So again, it goes back to transparently discussing where an organization may have fallen short, where we need to grow. And I think in the earlier sessions, the CEOs and the communication experts spoke really importantly and decidedly about how do you weave that thread, because people don't forget, right? So these communities don't forget the experiences that they've had. So you have to really address those if you expect to get actual data that's going to make a difference and actually help you to do something with regard to strategy. And then also with regard to data collection and methodology, what are your protocols around data protection, confidentiality, making sure that those parameters are very clear and very secure. We are in the age of technology and data breaches, and people have very real concerns about that. So being very transparent, I think, with the groups that you're collecting from around your strenuous security is going to be really key as well. And then also thinking about, from a communications perspective, all the time over communicating what's the purpose of collecting this data, how will it benefit the community and the strategy you have with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion, how will you maintain the data, and really making sure that your values stay front and center as to why you're committed to this reporting. Because I think Bob touched on it there. We have so much data, and I think people are very tired of giving all of that information out in ways, in intentional ways and sometimes unintentional ways. Sometimes I see things that are being tracked that I'm like, I didn't even realize I reported that. So being very clear as to what and why you're collecting this data around and what you're going to do with it is going to be really critical. And then if I could just make a couple more points around that, the quality and the consistency of the data, making sure that your collection methods themselves are standardized across the ethnicity populations that you are collecting from, uniform questions, where they show up, because a lot of times this tends to be self-reported and kind of self-selected. So you have to be very careful to be aware of any bias in the data itself because of who self-selects to respond to ethnicity reporting. And then thinking about that quality of it and making sure that you have a scientific approach overall. So for practitioners, it absolutely is a skill that I recommend connecting with your data team, right? They do this for the business and other parts of the business, and DEI work should have just as much rigor around methodology and support and resources to make sure the data is actionable. And then when you think about the ethical considerations and really the sensitive demographic data that you may get, and then the compliance concerns. I know Fiona talked a bit about that as well, the legal compliance concerns that show up. We're a global organization at LexisNexis, and there's certain jurisdictions that we are represented in that don't even allow for this kind of ethnicity data reporting. So working hand in hand with your legal compliance team and making sure you're compliant in and of itself is going to be very key. And then I think there's this kind of moral conversation that happens around when you collect ethnicity data specifically. So I'm based in the United States. We recently had the Supreme Court decision around affirmative action, and there's some underlying tones there around ethnicity reporting and then kind of like what comes out of that. Affirmative action, as we all know, was a system that would allow for specific affirmative actions to be taken for specific ethnic backgrounds. And then there's a value-based debate around, is that fair? Is that equitable? So when you're doing this kind of reporting, you have to really struggle with those challenging questions. And based on your values, based on saying value committed, to make a decision around how you're going to utilize the data in your strategy, and then stick to that decision. Because the worst thing you can do is set a course and then change in a way that loses trust in the community that you're hoping to gain insight from. So of course, as you learn things, as data uncovers trends, you will have to adjust. But if you say value committed to why you're still collecting this data, that's going to be really the key to making sure that you're actually successful once you're able to do so.
Adonica, some really pertinent points there, and I'd love to open up to chip in on some of the things that you said. But a lot of what I'm hearing here, which Bob also alluded to, is actually when you start to really peel back the layer of the onion, there are many different factors to consider. But ultimately, it is not only the qualitative, but it's also the quantitative with the data. And what we've seen in a lot of the reporting efforts through our DAL diversity review is the fact that actually the higher up you go in the classical corporate hierarchy, the lower diversity is across all of those different areas of ethnicity and race. We used to talk a lot about BAME as an acronym in the UK, not so much in the US, but it was something that we always particularly disliked, even though it was the well-known, because actually it is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. You look within each of those areas and there are diversities within diversities within diversities. And then to your points that you all made, is there is also the legal legislative pieces while still staying ahead of the curve. And so building and fostering the trust within our organizations so that actually there is true safety as to why there is disclosure of the data. But equally, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed ultimately. And so it is because of individuals like yourselves that there is, and again, Donica, you'd mentioned this, there is at times that real kind of emotional tax and emotional exhaustion because you guys are influencing mile wide and mile deep at the same time. So how do we keep the gas on with continuing to do initiatives internally that win the hearts and minds of our communities and are not performative, but ultimately that we keep moving the dial on data, because if we measured everything within the organization from an ethnicity point of view, it wouldn't show us that actually the drop-off points are as you get up that classical corporate hierarchy. Anyhow, any reflections, Bob and Fiona, on some of the things that were mentioned?
Sorry, Layla, I was just going to say that doesn't surprise me. I think, if I just think about my own peer group, those of us of colour, those of us of mixed heritage, just across those identities, you'll know that you're fighting multiple battles. So if you want to get to the very top, you've got scars like you've carried with you all the way through. And so your battle is on many layers. So we're trying to say, in order to move the dial forwards, you need the data, you need this, you need that. But then every day you're in this political kind of sort of, lobbying, influencing, and of course that's what all good leaders do. But sometimes I feel, if I talk to some of my peers, you've had one arm tied behind your back, and so you're kind of battling on so many fronts. So it doesn't surprise me, which is even more the reason why we have to do something about it and do something about it differently and collectively. And I think, each of these sort of challenges, whether they're privacy, security, whether it's legal, they're all surmountable. You can do this, but it just takes a bit of, real sort of determination, really, and kind of sort of strong sort of determination, really, to kind of get through it. But actually, I think we're missing an opportunity around getting critical mass on this, and not just about race, ethnic pay reporting. I think more broadly around all the identities, because that will be true of every identity group. Will say that they've had one arm tied behind their back, or they've had to fight multiple battles that others don't have to fight. So actually, how do you kind of collectively get that voice? But I feel there's a bit of an inflection point, not inroads. I think there's a bit of an inflection point going to Adonica's point around, being inclusive without excluding other groups. And so there's a real debate going on and conversation going on, and that is almost, it's absolutely important and critical, but it's actually perhaps taken away some of the momentum that collectively, if we got our heads together, that we could kind of make progress. So I feel it's a conversation that's live, and I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that it's the right thing to do. It's, for me, beyond any of the commercial viability of it, if you want to represent society and you say you want to work with people that that you serve, then clearly you've got to have a makeup of different people, you know, different levels, different socioeconomic backgrounds, identities, etc., etc. And so I think there's every reason to do it.
If I could just quickly add to what Bob said, Layla, I totally agree with you, Bob, because especially having had, you know, an ethnically diverse background myself, right? So you have that kind of lived experience, but to the point that you're making around contextualizing the findings. And I think that's really key when we talk about data reporting here, is what kind of data are we talking about? I think the immediate logical jump is survey data, because that's kind of what we're used to, but there's much more than just a survey or numbers that you can really glean data from, right? So thinking about qualitative data is just as important. And then also thinking about the ways in which you collect the data, not just a survey, but perhaps a focus group, perhaps employee resource groups and their feedback reports, ways in which that you can get employee engagement surveys, ways in which you can get more than just baseline numbers that may not always give you the full context of the conversation. And then when you do have those just straight numbers-based surveys, making sure that you have the accountability there around what are you doing with it, and then allowing people to be able to rectify what they've already reported as well, I think is really critical, because it may not reflect their full identity, or as you evolve your collection processes, they may want to evolve how they respond to it too. So there's just so much to think about when you're collecting data in and of itself. And then be data informed, but not data driven, because the numbers can change. In our own organization, we've seen growth in our ethnic minority representation in senior leadership, which we're very happy about, but we also see trends, right? So numbers change and they can evolve, but you think about marrying that to a strategy that you stay committed to. Stay committed to the strategy, iterate based on the results you're getting in your data. That's going to be key.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing here around, it's almost this agile way of working that we are living in continuously right now, because you know, we're in different countries. When in fact, actually, I know Bob over in China, Adonica in the States, Fiona in the UK, all with their different kind of smorgasbord of cultures and nuances and specifics around data. But as you say, accountability is absolutely key. How do we also utilize our brilliant employee resource groups and our focus groups to collect that qualitative data as well as the pure hard numbers? Because whilst we must be data driven in our decision making, being more informed with those nuances on the ground is key. Fiona, I'd love to come to you for any reflections, but I'll come back to Bob on our final question.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. It's really interesting to listen to you, and I think the point comes back to is like, although someone said to me like, you know, data never lies, but it also doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story, and that's what you've got to get underneath, haven't you, to see what is happening here, and I think it's just like questioning. I think we should always be questioning the data and just saying, is it giving us the right information? Is it giving us it in the right nuanced way? And so that's data is interesting, but it is only part of the story. And the other element that you've mentioned earlier on is, so I'll come back to, is that the trust part with whether it's employees or whatever. Do you know, if people are not trustful of the way the data is being used, then they won't volunteer the information. And that's almost like, you know, the first step, isn't it? Getting people willing to volunteer the information in the correct way, as Adonica said, and using it appropriately.
Indeed, and that means investing in these initiatives,
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Which I know, you know, you've all heard me harp on about diversity as a commercial lever. Bob, it absolutely at heart and centre is the right thing to do. But with everything, Fiona, you'd start off with talking about actually our future generations are already naturally becoming more diverse. Well, we have to have, as diversity and culture leaders, the investment in these initiatives internally. So it is not then purely seen as a performative, you know, data collection piece, because it's something that we have to do. But on that point, you know, I know a number of you have mentioned 2024, 2025, which is what we are seeing as a real watershed moment. Adoption of many other frameworks, you know, the wealth economy framework, looking at, you know, not just GDP or USD as the benchmark, but actually human capital, knowledge capital, social capital. All of these things are a upward moving trend, contrary to polarizing at times news headlines that we are seeing. And so knowing that it is key for organizations to actually look at what is happening and being futuristic, as opposed to getting caught up purely in this momentary, you know, panic or almost paralysis, you know, be it through data, be it through the fear of speaking out, etc. That trend is not going away, and I think it's really important. You know, I mention it because you know, individuals are in roles like yours becoming quite fatigued with having to explain over and again. You know, they are the most tenacious individuals within the workplace. Again, I'm very biased, but it is absolutely true. Bob, I'd love to come to you on our last question here around any other leading practice examples of how ethnicity reporting has positively impacted workplace dynamics and employee morale.
Yeah, absolutely, Lana. I think, you know, like I said at Skyscanner, we're definitely on this journey, you know, and I am, you know, from a UK perspective, you know, we're trying to mirror the gender pay methodology as recommended, which in itself presents a bit of challenge, obviously. And I think if you talk to anyone who does that report, they'll probably say there's a better way to do it. But anyway, that's what we've got. So we're desperately trying to get the right number to make it statistically robust. But, you know, I'm talking to colleagues in different industries as well. And, you know, I think I've mentioned to you before, you know, I was really inspired by the work that Auto Trader were doing in the UK, and really the kind of stance that they've taken. And the approach really, and just kind of made it front and center. And so I think where it's front and center from the leader at the top of the organization all the way down, you could really start to see the momentum. And so that fatigue kind of goes away, that arm behind your back suddenly it becomes another way for you to kind of move forwards and strive forwards. And actually, I've taken inspiration from, you know, even, you know, the like Fiona, you know, Royal Mail. You know, when you look at Royal Mail, you look at BP, you look at the size of these organisations. You know, we're 1,400 colleagues. You know, we're a global business. I'm sitting in China, and so, you know, when you look at organisations and you think, well, you know, how they've managed it, and we're only 1,400 people, we can surely do it. You know, it's but like Adonica, we operate in geographies that, you know, disclosing some of this data is not safe for you. And so you have to then watch out what you're looking for and what you're asking for and where you're gonna put that data. And so everyone should feel safe. And so it becomes a bit more complicated. But I've seen a lot of really good work and good effort, and so that just inspires me. And I think the more you can share these types of opportunities, so people can look and say, okay, it is possible, we can do it. You know, we can use focus groups, we could use different methods to get that data. You got to build that trust. It comes back to it. I think if there's one continuity on why these organizations have done it so well, and I've named a few, it's because they've built that trust with their colleagues. They've built that trust with their colleagues to say, you give us the data and you're going to help inform us. And that's, I think, what you were saying earlier on about being informed, you know, around, I think, you know, it informs you, it constantly changes, but it helps you to get that baseline, like we've heard on this call, to really then make a difference. So unless you build that trust with colleagues, they won't give it to you, but then you've got to demonstrate action. You can't just ask for the data. You can't then say, right, what we're going to do with this data. You've got to take some brave steps. And when it works brilliantly. And we have seen that in gender, you know, and you can argue sometimes people say, well, it hasn't moved enough, but we have seen progress, and progress is what it's all about. We have to make progress and take those. If you're talking about agility, then, you know, working in a tech business, you know, it is all about that incremental, fast sort of steps that you take, and that creates progress, and that continuous improvement really helps you really kind of deliver ultimately the challenge that's facing you. So you've bite-sized or you've bitten off all of those bits, and you've basically got the momentum to then deliver change that is then sustainable. And I think that's, for me, the trust. Doing something with the data, sustainable action, is really what I've seen out of leading practice.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I'm really pleased there that you mentioned the importance of the CEO. Obviously, we're huge fans of CEOs as activists. I know it can be at times a controversial word, but actually this is the time more now than ever that we need our leaders to step up. And, you know, that trust, that investment, it starts at the top. So as you say, being informed, being, you know, of course, aware of sensitivities, but knowing and acknowledging that what gets measured ultimately does get done. You know, this is about progress. It is not always about perfection. And I think the candor that all of you have displayed throughout this panel with, you know, look, we tried this, it might not have worked, but actually we'll try something else. Ultimately, as we start to see the hockey stick move, it's never a purely, you know, it's never a perfect hockey stick. Actually, it is keeping the momentum on, keeping having the conversations, and collaborating with our peers internally and also externally within organizations to keep on moving that dial. Before we run out of time, because I could literally talk to three of you here all day, final words and thoughts and actions for those that are listening in to this panel thinking, right, this is the push that I needed for us to influence and take it up the chain to do more. Adonica, I'll come to yourself then, Fiona, and then back again to Bob.
Sure. So for me, I think I'm a pretty practical person. At the end of the day, we're here for work, right? And that requires financial performance and it requires financial growth. And there's a couple of things that I think are really important. So making a plug for the resources that you talked about that are necessary to do this work and the commitments that's necessary. Layla, I know you and I have talked a lot about wealth, and we're currently as a globe facing the greatest wealth transfer in history. As you look at baby boomers transferring their wealth to the youngest generation of individuals in our society, and they are also the most ethnically diverse population that we've had generationally ever. So to Fiona's point about having children that have multiracial backgrounds, those two things come together to mean financial performance. So when you think about the transfer of wealth and the existing populations that we're going to be facing into the future, this is an imperative for the business to succeed into the future. And so I think it's not a matter of if, but how we do this, and continue to stay committed to this work is going to be key.
It's not if, but how. I love that. Fiona.
Well, clearly I work in industrial relations, so I don't know if I could get through 45 minutes without mentioning the trade unions. But certainly in my organisation, I think that's the key element as well as our trade union. Just one small example in terms of our employee survey. No, actually, sorry, it's not the employee survey, it's the annual performance review. We share that data with our trade union, and they're the ones who question what that bell curve looks like across gender and ethnicity. They're the ones who will say, so what do our ethnic minority managers, where are they sitting on that bell curve? And I think that's important just to get into. I think your next one might be about allyship, but make sure you've got people also questioning the data. It's not just through one lens; it needs to be through multiple lenses. And I think, and I'll just mention again, it's just always question the data, always question what it's telling you, and triangulate that. That's all for me. Thank you.
Multiple lenses of intersectionality. Really great point. And Bob, finally to yourself.
Yeah, just take it from Nike, just do it. It's just, I don't think there's three words there, but you can't procrastinate about this. You just got to do it. And so, my inspiration's from Nike. You just got to do it.
What a great way to end this panel. Thank you all very, very much indeed. I don't have too much time to summarize here, but I will. I know I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. Stoicism is something I've been reflecting on an awful lot of late. And look, we know that there are challenges. Diversity culture leaders like you are doing such great things because of the influence mile deep and mile wide historically with less in terms of budgets. But actually, Stoicism focuses on things that we can control rather, and letting go sometimes of everything else. Bob, as he said, sometimes we just got to do it. Let's turn every obstacle that we can into an opportunity to get better, stronger, tougher, more resilience. And as Marcus Aurelius put it nearly 2,000 years ago, the impediment to action advances action. So what stands in the way becomes the way. And on that note, I'm going to thank you all very, very much. Please do stay tuned for our next panel, which is coming up. We've had some brilliant guests who have been on the panels today, and we've got plenty of other fantastic guests to come. After the next session, we're going to be talking about authentic corporate allyship, moving beyond performative actions. A perfect segue from this brilliant panel we have just had. The panel is going to be chaired by Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green, a dear friend, Ruth Hunt, Director of Deeds and Words. And we've got some panelists across the board from global organisations such as Pfizer, Antonia Bevers, DEI Europe lead, Sandy Gold, who's the Chief People Officer for Pinwheel API, the Senior Director for Work, Human People and Analytics Research, Misha Ann Martin, and finally the superb Paul Smith, who is Global Director for People Experience, Culture and Learning. Oh, managed to get it all in there. So keep tagging in Dial Global. Please do share and like everything that we're doing. We couldn't do what we did without you and all of our brilliant community. And thanks once again to Royal Mail, because we make all of our summits free for all. We believe in fostering education and inspiration as far and wide as we possibly can. Thanks once again, and we'll see you after the ad break.